This is Jake Dowling from the Evening Leader and Seth Kinker from the Community Post in Minster. We're in week 2 of our Inside the Huddle preview of high school football. So obviously this week for St. Mary's, it's Wapak versus St. Mary's, New Bremen and Marion Local, and then Minster and Coldwater, right? Yep. So we'll talk about the opposing team a little bit. We'll get into the matchups then for each game. So start with New Bremen and Marion Local. What you got this week?
Yeah. New Bremen's, of course, coming off their 20-0 win against Minster last week, their first wins in 9 years. They take on Marion Local, another strong opponent who's coming off of a comeback win against Fort Recovery last week. They had to score 16 points unanswered in the fourth quarter, and so they're breaking in, Marion Local anyway is breaking in a new quarterback and a running back as well, but they've got a tall task to face for New Bremen. New Bremen, they really want to kind of build off the things they did last week in that 20-0 win against Minster. They controlled the trenches as the game went on, doubled up time of possession, and had just under 300 yards rushing. And really, that's going to be what they continue to look to do. Talked to Coach Chris Smith yesterday after practice, and one of the things he said was kind of scoring when they have the chance. It being early in the season, he knows that defenses are generally ahead of offenses anyway at this time of the season, and this being a unique season with the pandemic and just one scrimmage, that it's definitely the case this year. So he expects it to be a low-scoring game. And he said the offense kind of needs to take advantage when it can, and whether that's field goals or points, or touchdowns, whenever they can, they need to put points on the board.
So for St. Mary's and Wapakoneta, they're kind of in the same boat. St. Mary's last week obviously had that 27-7 win against Bath, but that was a slow start. It was scoreless the entire first half. Talking to Coach Doug Fry on Tuesday, he had said going into this game, this would be game 4, game 5. St. Mary's had 3 scrimmages scheduled for this summer, so that would have been game 5 going in. This is game 2, so they lose a lot of their offense, and they're still kind of getting accustomed to that. Wapak definitely is in the same way. Wapak is rebuilding a lot of their key positions, so that's going to be hard for them to kind of get used to that. They lose a number 1 running back in Evan Keck, who is pretty much like a closer in football. You could run him in the fourth quarter if it was a close game or you were trailing. He'd get you the points and then just shut out the other team. They didn't have that last week against Lyon, that kind of showed up. And then they have a new quarterback. They lose Miracle, who was their quarterback last year. He graduated, so they're trying out a new quarterback. He had got hurt that Lyon game last week, and they had somebody else take over. So we don't really know the quarterback position or situation there at St. Mary or in Wapakoneta. Last year, got some of my notes here. Wapak was 9-2. They tied with Kenton in the WBL with an 8-1 record. Lost to Trumbull Madison in the quarterfinal. It's a typical postseason opponent for Wapakoneta around here. And their 3 running backs were in the top 10 in the league. So they lose Evan Keck, who is the number 1 running back for them. I think he's a 3-year starter. The last 2 years, he's just been a closer for Wapak. So Connor McDonald, who's a senior, comes back. He's in the top 10 rushing last year in the WBL. So that's something that St. Mary's will have to look for. But like I was saying, last year at the same time, St. Mary's and Wapak were rebuilding in certain positions, and for St. Mary's it was running back. That was a key position for obviously for St. Mary's, and at quarterback. Wapak, their rebuilding wasn't in key positions. Flip the tables this year. St. Mary's has depth at running back. They bring back their running back. Really, their one rebuilding position might be linebacker. For Wapak, they lose their top running back, so they're kind of rebuilding there. Doesn't help with the pandemic, and then you got the quarterback, and they lose a linebacker or 2. Like Heck was a middle linebacker, so they lose like a stone wall in there in that middle linebacker spot. So the matchup, I think, for Monday or for Friday's game will be that middle linebacker position for Wapak versus St. Mary's as running backs. So we'll see what happens there. This games always tend to be low scoring. In 2016 it was a low scoring game. 2017 was a low scoring game. 2018 for some reason it was a slugfest in the rain, in the mud of all conditions. And then last year was another low scoring game. The Wapak won in overtime with Keck 3 straight runs in the goal line and getting go-ahead touchdown. So we'll see what happens here. I think that St. Mary's has a little bit of advantage just because their running backs have depth at that position. One person to kind of look out for, Aiden Hinkle, who missed all preseason. He missed the scrimmage against Marion Local. His first game, very raw against Bath. He had that fumble at the 1-yard line, but Fry had the confidence in him, went back and had a 48-yard screen pass that went down to like the 3 or 4. That sent things up, and that kind of got the ball rolling for St. Mary's. So he's somebody that if he can get his feet underneath him a little bit, and everybody's kind of in that same situation where, their feet aren't quite underneath them right now because of the pandemic. But if he can, he could be like a kind of person. He's 6 foot, 225 pounds, a sophomore, a big kid. So if they can get him going, it's really gonna benefit St. Mary's in the running game for sure. So I think that's a matchup to look out for: the running backs versus linebackers. We'll see how things go for St. Mary's. Also, the quarterback Gavin Reneke, it was his first start last week against Bath, first start since week 3 of last year against Glandorf. So he came into the ball game last year on his first career start and 2 quarters of varsity action against Sydney the week before last year. So he goes into this season, he's a lot more experienced. I think that offense against Walmart last year was hampered a little bit because their quarterback wasn't experienced. They couldn't run that offense the way they wanted to. Now they can. And they had the passing game with that screen pass that I talked about against Bath as a good example where they can unleash that whatever they want to. But having Gavin, I think will make that offense run a little bit more crisp in a time where everybody, like you said, everybody's kind of behind right now. And I think that could be a good benefit for St. Mary's the week 2. So, wow, what you got for Minster then?
So I stopped by practice again yesterday. Talked to Minster's head coach, Garen Stokes, and one of the big things, they're facing Coldwater this week, who's coming off a week 1 victory. And it's another typically strong MAC program, and I kind of asked Garen a couple questions, and he didn't even really want to talk about Coldwater. It was kind of getting back to what they needed to do, because, if you look at their week 1 loss against New Bremen kind of, in every statistical category, was ahead. Minster couldn't really get their offense going. One of the biggest things they needed to address is kind of the snap game. They had a lot of high snaps, low snaps, and things like that didn't allow them to kind of ended the play really before it even began because they weren't able to get into their offense. So that's kind of a big thing. Another one is just execution. They were misaligned on a lot of plays, and head coach Garen Stokes took credit for a lot of that. He said it's a lot of it's on coaching, and they need to get the team better prepared. But just to kind of ask him to focus on the biggest things that they need to improve on, like without even looking at Coldwater, you just said they just need to play harder to cover up some of those. They just got to play harder. They got to execute. He said they had 3 first downs through the 4 quarters against New Bremen, which is just not going to cut it against any team. Mm-hmm. So they just got to. For them, it's just kind of focusing on themselves more than looking at their opponent right now. And he said it. He's like, every team's in the playoffs, so they just have to continue to keep getting incrementally better and build on each week rather than kind of look too much at their opponent. They're going to look at their own camp first.
Yeah, and of all teams that you could play against to try to get back into the rhythm of things, you play Coldwater.
Yep.
So that's a tough matchup. It's a tough matchup for anybody, but it's definitely a tough matchup for Minster coming off that game against New Bremen.
Yeah.
What does Coldwater look like against that matchup against Minster? I don't really know a lot about Coldwater because I don't cover the MAC that much, but what do they look like going in this matchup?
Head coach Chip, I was asking Garen Stokes about that, and he said, he didn't want to get into it as far as that because he was just so focused on them. So I think it's more focused on, despite whatever, they're clearly game planning for Coldwater, preparing for what they do, but there were so many things he said, just going right down to misalignment and all that, where he said, regardless of what Coldwater does, if we don't take care of things on our end, then it's not going to matter at all. So, that's really what they're focused on. Coldwater, they return experience. They got some good guys back this year. So it's like you said, it's going to be another tall task, not an easy program to go up against, trying to kind of continue to get their footing under them.
Yep.
For me, my eyes are kind of on Minster and what they do to continue to clean up their small mistakes more than anything.
Yeah, I think at this point right now, because the preseason's done, we already know that either nobody has any scrimmages or teams have just 1 scrimmage compared to the 2 or the 3. So everybody's kind of trying to take what they have been given and trying to work with it and just focus on themselves and not so much on the other team. I kind of got that sense from Fry as well as, our running backs aren't quite there yet. He had talked about in the Bath game, they had 3 or 4 fumbles. I think they had 3 listed. I think I counted 3 in the first half alone. When the running backs got hit, they're not used to that, getting hit, and they fumbled quite a bit in that game. So just something small tasks like that, I think a lot of players just aren't used to because they don't have the hits yet. And I think a lot of teams that are just going to be focused more on themselves and what they can fix, and it helps because in a way, because everybody's going to go to the playoffs if they so choose anyway. So, if you lose, it's not like, you're not going to go to the playoffs, but it allows you then to just focus on your team a little bit more than maybe you normally would have to, because that's what you had the preseason for. So we'll see what happens this week. Obviously, St. Mary's will host Walpock in Grand Lake Health System Field, the first game of the season there. And they go to Marion local, right?
Yep. It's on the road, and then Minster's at home.
Yep, so it'll be pretty interesting to see what happens. So be sure to check the Evening Leader. Thursday's edition will have the preview in there, some other good tidbits as well. And then obviously the Community Post with their weekly coverage on their website. Also check theeveningleader.com and our social media pages as well. Facebook for the Evening Leader and EL Sports on Twitter, and then obviously for Minster as well.
Yeah, Minster Community Post on Facebook and CPS Sports 1896 on Twitter.
All right, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.